Thank you, Mr. President. Is this on? Okay. I want to follow up on something exchange you had with Chip. Leaving aside the existing permits for drilling in the Gulf, weeks before BP, you had called for expanded drilling. Do you now regret that decision, and why did you do so, knowing what you have described today about the sort of dysfunction in the MMS?
I continue to believe what I said at that time, which was that domestic oil production is an important part of our overall energy mix. It has to be part of an overall energy strategy. I also believe that it is insufficient to meet the needs of our future, which is why I've made huge investments in clean energy, why we continue to promote solar and wind and biodiesel and a whole range of other approaches, why we're putting so much emphasis on energy efficiency. But we're not going to be able to transition to these clean energy strategies right away. I mean, we're still years off and some technological breakthroughs away from being able to operate on purely a clean energy grid. During that time, we're going to be using oil. And to the extent that we're using oil, it makes sense for us to develop our oil and natural gas resources here in the United States and not simply rely on imports. That's important for our economy. That's important for economic growth. So the overall framework, which is to say domestic oil production should be part of our overall energy mix, I think continues to be the right one. Where I was wrong was in my belief that the oil companies had their act together when it came to worst-case scenarios. Now, that wasn't based on just my blind acceptance of their statements. The oil drilling has been going on in the Gulf, including Deepwater, for quite some time. And the record of accidents like this, we hadn't seen before. But it just takes one for us to have a wake-up call and recognize that claims that fail-safe procedures were in place or that blowout preventers would function properly or that valves would switch on and shut things off, that whether it's because of human error, because of the technology was faulty, because when you're operating at these depths you can't anticipate exactly what happens, those assumptions prove to be incorrect. And so I'm absolutely convinced that we have to do a thoroughgoing scrub of those safety procedures and those safety records. And we have to have confidence that even if it's just a 1 in a million shot, that we've got enough technology, know-how, that we can shut something like this down not in a month, not in 6 weeks, but in 2 or 3 or 4 days. And I don't have that confidence right now. Sure.
Are you sorry now, do you regret that your team had not done the reforms at the Minerals Management Service that you've subsequently called for? And I'm also curious as how it is that you didn't know about Ms. Birnbaum's resignation/firing before.
Well, you're assuming it was a firing. If it was a resignation, then she would have submitted a letter to Mr. Salazar this morning at a time when I had a whole bunch of other stuff going on.
So you ruled out that she was fired?
Come on, Jackie, I don't know. I'm telling you, I found out about it this morning. So I don't yet know the circumstances, and Ken Salazar's been in testimony on the Hill. With respect to your first question, at MMS, Ken Salazar was in the process of making these reforms. But the point that I'm making is that obviously they weren't happening fast enough. If they had been happening fast enough, this might have been caught. Now, it's possible that it might not have been caught. All right? I mean, we could have gone through a whole new process for environmental review. You could have had a bunch of technical folks take a look at BP's plans, and they might have said, this meets industry standards. We haven't had an accident like this in 15 years, and go ahead. That's what this commission has to discover is, was this a systemic breakdown? Is this something that could happen once in a million times? Is it something that could happen once in 1,000 times or once every 5,000 times? What exactly are the risks involved? Now, let me make one broader point, though, about energy. The fact that oil companies now have to go a mile underwater and then drill another 3 miles below that in order to hit oil tells us something about the direction of the oil industry. Extraction is more expensive, and it is going to be inherently more risky. And so that's part of the reason you never heard me say, drill, baby, drill. Because we can't drill our way out of the problem. It may be part of the mix as a bridge to a transition to new technologies and new energy sources. But we should be pretty modest in understanding that the easily accessible oil has already been sucked up out of the ground. And as we are moving forward, the technology gets more complicated. The oil sources are more remote. And that means that there's probably going to end up being more risk. And we as a society are going to have to make some very serious determinations in terms of what risks are we willing to accept. And that's part of what the Commission, I think, is going to have to look at. I will tell you, though, that understanding we need to grow, we're going to be consuming oil for our industries and for how people live in this country. We're going to have to start moving on this transition. And that's why when I went to the Republican caucus just this week, I said to them, let's work together. You've got Lieberman and Kerry, who previously were working with Lindsey Graham, even though Lindsey's not on the bill right now, coming up with a framework that has the potential to get bipartisan support and says, yes, we're going to still need oil production,
H.R. 5136 in the Committee of the Whole and
the time to get moving on this is now. And I am prepared to work with both parties and members of Congress to get a bill that does a good job securing our borders, holds employers accountable, makes sure that those who have come here illegally have to pay a fine, pay back taxes, learn English, and get right by the law. We have the opportunity to do that. We've gotten a vote